Welcome to the Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. My name is Dr. Adriana Popescu. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and leader in the field of mental health, energy psychology, addiction, trauma, and empowerment. In this podcast, we will be exploring mental health from a variety of perspectives, from the spiritual to the shamanic and beyond. What if mental illness isn't everything we think it is? What if everything we see as a pathology is actually a possibility? What else is possible with mental health?
Hi, everyone. Dr. Adriana Popescu here with you again for another episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. I'm really excited to have with me today as my guest, straight from the UK, Jonathan Kemp. He is a mental health advocate, entrepreneur, and creator of Smart Wisdom, a scientifically validated note-taking technique. He was born into privilege as the future third Viscount Rochdale. He built careers in law enforcement and entrepreneurship and undertook postgraduate study, unaware that bipolar disorder, depression, and dyslexia were shaping his life. His mental illnesses were diagnosed at age 39 when he finally sought professional help. And he's been on a crusade ever since to advocate for mental health well-being. Jonathan won the British Dyslexia Association's Entrepreneur of the Year award in 2011. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you very much for having me. Greatly appreciated.
Yes. I'm so excited to hear about your story. So let's just start there. How did you come to be doing what you're doing?
It's been a long journey. So, I mean, one of the questions that people ask or think, if you have a privileged upbringing, you have all your needs met. Surely, if you're talking about mental health, you're just moaning and just get on with it. Everything's fine. And I think it was certainly important for me to understand that mental health is a bit like diabetes or a weak heart. If you've got those things, you've got them, and they're no respecter of, background, cultural, educational advantages. And no amount of privilege will shield you from whatever illness that you have. But I think it ties in with the idea that mental illness is something that is a choice in some ways or a weakness. And certainly for myself, so I had no idea what was going on. And by about the age of 6 or 7, I knew there was something wrong. I knew I was different to other people. I didn't know what it was. I felt I didn't fit in. I felt disconnected from my family. I wished that I'd been born in other circumstances. And it just sort of went on from there. At school, I struggled. I was supposed to go on to, university and beyond. I didn't do well in my exams and got to the point where I just thought, I've had enough. I'm not going to bother studying. And so I didn't do well in my final exams. And it was actually the time that punk rock came along. And to me, it was like manna from heaven. It was just fantastic. The music, the whole movement, the way people dressed, what people were singing about, that there was no fun, that life was pointless, that anarchy in the UK. It was just I completely resonated with it. And I left school. Most of my contemporaries went on to university. I worked on building sites. I worked in restaurants. And I was really lucky, actually. I got an opportunity to go to Australia for a year. And I worked as, they call it a jackaroo out there, but in America, you refer to them as cowboys.
Yes.
And I worked as a jackaroo on a cattle station in
Mhm.
in the Australian outback for a year. And it was during that time that, again, I had these same sort of feelings. Just something wasn't right. It was difficult sometimes just to sort of function and to concentrate. And yeah, I had just no idea what was going on. But one thing I had decided was to, rather than sort of fight and rebel, was try and do a good job, and maybe that it was something external, because I'd always sort of fought the system. I thought, right, okay, I'm now going to try and really do a good job, and maybe that might be what the problem is. Um, it was one of the best years of my life. Loved loved it, and I came back. I trained as a bricklayer, and I'm not quite sure what my family thought, but anyway, so I did that, and then I actually got a job in the Met Police, in the London Police, and I was in the Met for 12 years. And again, the sort of thinking behind joining was that maybe this will sort me out. I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to study really hard rather than just sort of saying, what the heck? Um, and and so that's precisely what I did. And I did well in my exams. I passed my sergeant's exam very early on with really good grades. But looking back now, I probably studied time and a half to double time what everyone else did to achieve the same result. I wasn't aware that this was going on. I just knew that for things to sort of sink into my brain, I had to work really hard and long hours. And so that was that. Um, I had no idea that I might be neurodivergent. If somebody had even used that word, I wouldn't have had a clue what they were talking about. And a lot of police work is about just being able to communicate, being able to de-escalate situations. Um, and there's also sort of quite an intuitive element to it in terms of just solving day-to-day situations. But whatever I did, I never felt it was enough. So I bought a property, run down property, and while I was working in the police, I was renovating that at the same time. I then got involved in the stock market and realized I could make more money in the stock market. So I immediately stopped renovating this property, and it had no electricity. No, it had electricity, had no water. It had a cold water tap under the stairs. There was no back on the house because I'd taken it off and jacked it up. And it was snowing, but that was fine as far as I was concerned. And then I met some people who were talking about investing in the stock market, making lots of money, and I just heard the making lots of money bit. I was later to discover you can lose lots of money as well. And yeah, I threw myself in it. I mean, I now know, again, this is benefit of hindsight looking backwards, that actually I was on a bipolar high, but I had no knowledge of this or understanding of this at the time. And as far as I was concerned, I was a useless so and so, and I deserved to push myself as hard and for as long as I could. Um, the stock market crashed, and by that time, I was completely exhausted. I had chest pains. I had sort of slight paralysis down my face, and yeah, I was completely defeated. And again, with benefit of hindsight, I was experiencing a bipolar crash. And this went on. I stayed for another about 7 years in the police, did various roles, and I left. So I thought to myself, the reason I felt the way I did, it was something external. So I'd tried the working hard and, trying to do the right thing. I was aware that I'd had these mood switches, and sometimes I'd behave not as I would wish, um, and would be really embarrassed afterwards. But I couldn't. It just sort of my behaviour just seemed to sort of overtake me. Um, and so I tried making money, and that didn't have any difference. And so I was thinking, well, it's because I haven't gone to university. That must be the reason why I feel the way I feel. And so I went to university. I skipped the undergraduate degree because of my work experience, and I did a postgraduate diploma in management studies. I got distinction. I then did a master's in nice, easy subject. It was shipping, international trade, and finance. It was an absolute nightmare from about day three. And I nearly left. I just thought if my level of knowledge around maths and statistics is here, everyone else was starting at this point, and there was no way I could bridge that gap. Anyway, I was persuaded to stay, and I worked 10 to 12 hours a day. I took one day off every 2 weeks, and I did that for a year. And I nearly got another distinction. And they said it was one of the most remarkable things they'd ever seen. And during this time, I had developed this technique for taking notes and also for planning essays. And I'd started off with other techniques, which I found worked, but I found that if I made certain changes, what I was using worked even better. I finished that, and I was completely burnt out from like the tip of my head down to the tip of my toes. I didn't even think I could flip burgers. And I had this continual interference in my head. And it's a bit like, when a television sort of goes like fuzzy, it was a bit like that. And then I'd have I was having this constant, I call it my brain falling off a cliff. So I could be sitting in the tube, or I could be walking around, and it would just feel that my brain would be going, "Ooh, doom, doom." Um, and I still hated myself. I still thought I was useless. And I worked in shipping for a couple of years, and then I set up my own business. Um, and in some ways, setting up my own business, it suited me well, because I like the sort of creative entrepreneurial element of doing your own thing. But when my mental health was in poor state, I just wished, oh, why couldn't I be employed by someone? I don't have to think about how to get clients. I don't have to worry about the money. In the police, didn't matter what the economy was doing. We got paid at the end of the month. Um, and I tried self-help courses. I tried a few gurus, in the self-development space. Um, After one of them, I came back home and I went vegan overnight, and I lost about a fifth of my body weight, I think, in 6 weeks. And some of my clients thought I had cancer. Um, but I was just desperate. I was getting up at 5 in the morning. So I changed my diet completely. I was getting up at 5 in the morning, doing rigorous exercise, just clutching at anything to try and feel better. And I did for about on and off for about maybe a month, but it was quite a hyper state. And again, I now realize that I'd had an almighty bipolar high. I sort of sustained it for about 4 weeks, and then the stress got sufficient. I then crashed again. Um, and then I tried a few other things, which are just, even talking about it, they were bonkers. And I reached another point of, for me, no return in my own mind. I tried everything, nothing worked. And the only option left was to go, that I thought was to go and see a therapist. And to me, which again, looking back, I mean, it's absolutely crazy, because if I was thinking about any other part of my body. So if I had a problem with my teeth, I wouldn't hesitate and go to the dentist. I wouldn't think I need to earn a degree or I need to go and make lots of money. If I had a problem with my eyes, which I did at one point, I lost sight in one of my eyes. It took me a few weeks, but I went to see the doctor and then I went to see specialists. Didn't think twice about, well, I did think twice about it, but I mean, I did it. However, anything to do with my brain, which is the most complicated part of my body, um, I had to solve it myself. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I think it was partly cultural. So, I'd been in boarding schools and we didn't really, and it was also, I think it was partly cultural and it was partly timing as well. So I was growing up in the 60s, 70s. And if people talked about therapists, it was sort of like, God, they're going to see a therapist. Yeah, yeah, they're a bit
Mm,
bit cuckoo, and it was some weird thing from the west coast of America.
right.
Um, and then if you saw a psychiatrist, that meant that you were nuts and a bit cuckoo, and that was even worse.
Hmm.
So there was a lot of stigma around seeing those, and actually some of the self-help groups that I joined to try and get better were very dismissive, or the group that I happened to be in was very dismissive about um, professional medical help. And it was all about self reliance, leading a spiritual life, so on and so forth. But again, I wouldn't have applied that if I'd have broken my leg. So I was applying this one rule for my brain and one rule for the rest of my body. And so I went to see a therapist. They said I was depressed, or they thought I was severely depressed, and I said, "No, I'm not." And the reason I said that with hindsight is because I knew no different. It'd been that way since I was about 6 or 7. It was just normal. I saw another therapist. They said exactly the same thing. And then after about a year of seeing them, and I found it very helpful actually seeing a therapist once I'd sort of accepted that that's what I was going to do. Just getting like professional insight into, they would ask me, well, why do you behave in that way? Or why do you react that way? And then they would get me to think about what I was doing. Um, I got sort of insights into my behavior. I got insights into how I avoided things. I used humor a lot to deflect and not talk about how I was feeling. Um, I have quite a rich vocabulary, um, which I have to be very careful of. Um, but again, I was using that to try and deflect from talking about how I was feeling and everything else. After a year or so, the therapist persuaded me to see a psychiatrist, and then they said, "You're depressed," and I said, "No, I'm not." And after they then asked me to track my moods, and one of my sort of traits is I'm highly analytical and highly detailed orientated. So I meticulously tracked my moods for a year, and I could see beyond any shadow of doubt that if that's feeling okay, most of the time I was sort of down here somewhere. Occasionally there would be a spike up, but then I would at some point come down, and then I'd be floating down, and occasionally I'd be sort of in the middle point, but more either high, but even more at the lower level. And I realized that the penny dropped, and I thought, yeah, there's a problem here. And actually, on encouragement of a friend, I started taking medication for depression. And it took a few months to sort of settle in, and also for me to notice the change. And it wasn't like a sort of overnight thing, it was just very, very gradual. And I thought, oh my God, I really have been depressed because I knew no comparison. It was only when I had the medication and the depression lifted, I was then able to look back and think, oh my goodness, I now understand what depression feels like and looks like because I've now got this comparison. Um, and then I sort of carried on. I had a few more ups and downs, and I reached another point where I was just completely defeated. And actually, funny enough, talking about cultural differences, some friends of mine had been to a psychiatric hospital in or unit in America, and the reason they went was because they felt in America the thinking and the understanding and the knowledge was ahead of the UK, and they found this place really helpful. So um, by force of circumstance and because my brain was just not functioning, I took out a bank loan and I went to this place for 4 weeks, and it was unbelievably helpful. And one of the first things that happened was I had another assessment from the one of the resident psychiatrists, and they diagnosed me with bipolar disorder. And I'm actually bipolar disorder type 2.
Mhm.
And what that means is, so type 1, you when you go high, you go into mania, and that means that you lose your attachment to reality. You start seeing things that aren't there, hearing voices, etc., etc. And the only way probably to stabilize is to go into hospital, get medication to bring you down, and then stabilize. I have bipolar type 2, which means that I have hypermania, which means the result of which is I'll go right up high, and then I'll be on this sort of almost this crossover point between the hypermania and the mania, but I just sort of keep a few toes in reality. And I'd never heard of this thing, had no idea what it was. And they gave me a video to look at, and I sort of dutifully looked at that. I came back to the UK, and things were different. I found relationships much easier. I found work relationships easier. I became more willing to sort of ask for help, because another thing that I found very difficult to do was asking for help in a work context. I had this thing where about self-sufficiency and being able to do everything myself. So another learning curve for me was actually reaching out to people and asking for help. And I can't really take credit for it because the times that I did it were because that I was under extreme pressure and I'd run out of options. So I needed to get some help. Um, so I was in my early 40s. I carried on doing this technique, smart wisdom, training people, had it scientifically tested by cognitive neuroscientists, and it showed that there was an increase in real-time understanding if you're using this technique, say in meetings, of 20%, which is huge. I then decided to get it tested, see if it helped people with dyslexia. So at this point, some of my colleagues had said, Jonathan, do you think you might be dyslexic? And I was saying, well, why do you think that? And they're saying, well, because of the way, sometimes the way you speak, sometimes you mix your sentences up a bit, you mix the words up, and your writing sometimes is the same thing. Sometimes somebody will ask you a question and you just go like quiet. You can see your brain working, trying to formulate an answer, but there is a time lag. And when I decided to get smart wisdom tested for people who had dyslexia in specifically, I thought, right, I'm going to go and get tested. And I went to see a psychologist who specialized in neurodivergence, did tests. They lasted for about 3 hours. And at the end of it, she said, yep, there's no doubt you have dyslexia. Um, and I didn't believe her. And I thought, no, I don't. She said, yes, you do. And explained, you know, what the tests were, what the results were, and why she came to the conclusion she did. And again, it's a bit sort of strange, despite all the challenges that I've had, in education and studying, that I should resist that diagnosis. Um, And it was, I think, a gradual process of acceptance. Um, yeah, and it sort of helped make things to make sense. So gradually, as I learned more about dyslexia, it helped to make sense why I spent time and a half to double time studying the same thing that other people are studying in half the time. And it helped to explain why I had difficulty in writing. So, but it was a particular type of writing I had real difficulty in. So if you ask me, as I did in the police, to write a historical timeline of something that's happened, I can do that because I can see it and I can visualize it and I can talk my way through it. Having said that, if you ask me to write a business proposal, even if I've been doing this type of business for years, it completely freaks my brain out. And I just think, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't. And unless I can actually see something and see how it all fits together, I have this like panic, and my brain sort of shuts down. I start feeling really depressed, and it's only when I then figure out, okay, I've got it. Would I then sort of come out of that low mood? And actually, for me now with AI, my goodness, what a difference that's made.
Yeah.
Um, it's So I will do the original work. I'll use Smart Wisdom to do a plan of whatever I'm thinking. I will type it up as if I'm talking to you. I'll go through it, edit it, and then I'll give it to ChatGPT or one of the other AI programs and say, please can you perform the role of a professional copy editor and copy edit this, but using my own voice, etc., etc. And it just takes off so much pressure. Because historically I would have given all my work to a professional copy editor, and with a to and fro, but that could take a week. But with ChatGPT, 5 minutes, a quick check to make sure that it was as I wanted it to be, and we're good to go. So for me, AI has been immensely helpful. Um, I think another big step forward was actually during COVID. And so I'd had 20 years of trying to sort my mental health and my neurodivergence out myself without really understanding what I was doing. I had 20 plus years experience of sort of getting help, um, getting assistance, understanding how these difficulties impacted me, what I could do about it. So I thought to myself, COVID, this is going to be like a walk in the park. I know what, feeling tough feels like. Bring it on. How wrong I was. And what I hadn't understood was the importance of social interaction, and importance of community. And for me and my mental health, mental well-being, it's absolutely crucial. And so now in day to day, I make a specific effort to go out. I work in one coffee shop in the morning. I work in another coffee shop in the afternoon. I live in central London, so I'm very lucky in that respect. And if I eat out in the same places, and and I go to the same place to do training and swimming. And I do it deliberately so that I see the same people day in and day out, and I'll just say hi and have a sort of brief chat. Um, I'm very aware of sort of being too talkative, so going a little bit hypermanic, and I avoid that. But yes, the social interaction makes an enormous difference. Um, and also, for me, it's a sort of, I use social interaction in a way as a form of mindfulness. So, for example, if I'm walking along the street and someone's walking towards me, I will more often not give way. So I'll just sort of indicate that they can walk on the wider part of the pavement, and I'll just step to one side. And I do that consciously, and I specifically do it with people who are from a different background, obviously different background to me, or people who are much younger. And the reason I do that is because I sort of know that they're expecting them to have to give way to me. And so I sort of flip it and I sort of stand to one side. And it's just those tiny little interactions I feel good about. And other things are like giving people directions, helping people with their luggage, because we've got the London Underground and they have like steep steps to come out. Anyway, so during COVID, I had about 3 or 4 bipolar highs and crashes. And when I go high, it can either be like in a really short time scale, like a week or 2 weeks. Sometimes the high can last months, but when the pressure becomes enough and the stress becomes enough, I'll crash. And when I crash, it's within 24 hours. And when I hit the bottom, it's like literally like my brain's been removed. And nothing I've learned or I've done will make a scrap of difference. And when I'm down there, I know beyond any shadow of doubt, it will never get better. It's really bizarre. And that'll last about 4 to 6 weeks. And the other thing that COVID did, it took away work as a crutch. So I do a lot of like training and coaching. And one of the impacts of COVID is that people just stop training and stop taking on coaches. And so I lost work. But more importantly, I lost the mechanism by which I used to pull myself out of these crashes. I would focus like laser-like focus on my work. And at some point, this would start to pull me out. I'd then start working all hours again. And then I'd start going into a high. And what I learned during COVID was actually I'd got it all wrong. I didn't need to manage what happened when I have a crash. I needed to manage the hypermania, because if I don't go hypermanic, I'm not going to crash. And anyway, after the third or fourth crash, again, I'd reached that turning point in the road. Was either I was going to call it a day, or I was going to get help. It's interesting why I should sort of, you know, how much stress I will put myself under, that I see that those are the only 2 options left. And I'd started writing the book, and I'd written a chapter on what to do when, like an action plan of what to do when things were really tough. And number 1 was to be open-minded and willing. And I remember when I wrote that, I sort of winced, because when I'm struggling, the last thing in the world I am is open-minded and willing. And then number 2 was to go and see a medical professional. And again, that wasn't my intuitive go-to solution. I might see a doctor, about a sore foot, and then say, "Oh, yeah. No, 3, 4 months ago, guy, it was really tough. It was really, really tough, but I'm okay now." What I wouldn't do is go and see them actually when it was happening. And number 3 was to take whatever advice I was told and do it. And so I did exactly that. I saw the doctor. I was completely honest and open. They arranged for me to see a psychiatrist within, I think, 3 or 4 days. It was really fast, because I've now got a long history with the doctor. Having said that, so I went to get help for about 10 years, but I paid for it myself because I didn't want anything on my record, my medical record. And then when I was about 50, I thought, well, this is ridiculous. I don't care who sees my record. And it wouldn't meaningfully impact my work, because I get my own clients. And if they don't like me, well, I'll just go and find another client. And the psychiatrist recommended I change medication, which I'd been advised to do a few times over the previous 10 years, but each time I'd refused to do it because what I had sort of worked. Well, I knew it sort of didn't as well. But also I knew taking medication, because I'd seen it with my friends, it's not a simple path. And what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for anybody else. And so it's like an uncertain experimentation. Um, and sure enough, it took about 4 or 5 months for it to settle. And so about August that year, so we're talking in August, I think it was 2021. After by about August, it was like a miracle. It was for the first time since I can remember, you know, it was my brain was just at peace with itself. It wasn't an effort to get up in the morning. It wasn't an effort just to move around. It wasn't an effort to think. Wasn't an effort to breathe. I could walk along the street and just like enjoy the weather and just enjoy watching, looking at everything around me. And yeah, it was a complete miracle. And I decided that if I had a sustained period of sort of mental well-being, then um, I would write this book. But I wasn't prepared to write it, and certainly wasn't prepared to publish it unless I had a sustained period. And so now I've been really lucky. I've had about 2.5 years of mental well-being, which for me is an absolute miracle.
Fascinating. Wow. What really strikes me about your story, Jonathan, is how long you struggled and suffered because you didn't know. You didn't know about mental health. You weren't educated. Um, and I think this is such a shortcoming both in the US and in the UK. Um, and maybe things have gotten better with time. Like you mentioned, the 60s and 70s was definitely a lot more stigma around mental health, but we're not educating our kids about mental health. We're not encouraging people to talk about their problems and what's going on with them. I mean, the whole thing of seeing it as an external, like the reason I'm unhappy and suffering is because my life on the outside isn't the way maybe I think it should be. And so, we're just not taught to look inward. We're not taught to talk about our feelings. It's seen, I think, as a sign of weakness, certainly working with like police and all first responders. I've certainly seen that. There's a lot of stigma around asking for help because it means you're weak and you got to toughen up and tough it out. So it's just fascinating to me that it took so long for you to get the care that you needed. And I think it probably informs what you're doing now with your book. And I want to hear about the walking tour you're going to be doing. Really trying to get information out there, right? Like what are you hoping now with your story and the sharing of your story? What would you like people to learn?
I think so. My motive for doing the book was I decided that, I come from a very privileged background, and I was driven by the idea of accumulating wealth and being successful. and and it was in my subconscious, always sort of niggling at the back of me. And during COVID, I came to a point and I realized, well, actually, I can define my own definition of wealth. And I thought to myself, well, the greatest wealth I have is the knowledge and experience around mental health. It's over 50 years worth of knowledge and experience, 20 plus trying to do it myself, 20 plus getting medical professional help, sometimes paying more attention to it than others. So I have this huge wealth of knowledge, and that I'm sort of competitive as well. And I thought, well, there won't be that many people with that range of experience. Um, And so then the second part, which sort of starts to answer your question, I thought, well, success for me is to actually get that information into one place, what I've done with the book, and then do my best to share my knowledge and experience in the public for the benefit of others. So actually, with the book, for the first year, all profits will be donated to mental health charities. So, and the reason I've done that is to keep my focus on, not to divert my focus and not to have in the background, oh, I need to make all these sales, but keeping it very much about, helping other people, putting my knowledge and experience out there and helping other people. And so in terms of the walk, again, that's really an external demonstration of finding peace of mind, both for myself. And what I'm hoping is that my story will help people to understand. So the people I come in contact with help people to understand mental health a bit better. For some people, it will be sort of educational. For some, I hope it will be inspirational. For others, I hope it will give them hope. And my plan on the walk, so I'm going to self-fund the walk. I hope to do talks throughout the duration of the walk. I also hope to interview, I've set a figure of about 50 people, but I hope to do about 50 in-person interviews of just people I meet on the way, and talk about mental well-being and what do they do to try and maintain that. And the plan is to walk from the Shetland Islands, which are above Scotland, all the way through England, then Scotland, then England, then up through Wales, and then cross over and then come down the length of Ireland. And it'll take about 7 months in total.
Amazing. A mental health walk. And tell us the name of your book.
I've got it here. It's Finding Peace of Mind. And the reason I titled that is that pretty soon after leaving school, people might have objectives of, well, I want to be in the army and I want to achieve this, 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 this. And I had two simple things that I wanted to achieve. One was to prove I wasn't stupid. And that stuck with me until it only stopped bothering me when I was in my late 40s. It's incredible how long the impact can be. And that was as a result of having the dyslexia at school and not being able to do well. And then the second objective I had was to find peace of mind. Those were my two life objectives.
Well, and I'm happy to hear that you were well on your way. It sounds like finally, 2.5 years without an episode is really quite impressive. And I'm now hopefully, I'm a big fan of the term post-traumatic growth. When we can see something positive finally coming out of something really painful and a lot of struggle. And I think you've certainly gone through that on your journey. But now being in a more stable place, like you called it, mental wellness, it's such a great term. And being able to share this now with other people to maybe help and inspire and give them hope, and also maybe help someone not have to suffer. A younger person maybe hears you or reads your book and finds out, hey, maybe I should go talk to somebody and figure out what's going on. Maybe it's not that I'm stupid. Maybe my brain works differently. Taking the pathology out of all of this, and not have it be a shame-based thing to ask for help, because we're not here to do it all solo. We need support. We need community. We need to talk to professionals who can support us. You would, if you needed to start a business, you would get a coach, you would get a consultant, you get an expert who knows what they're doing. So why wouldn't you do the same thing for your own mental wellness, right? Like, I love that you're out there advocating, as I am with this podcast, and those of us who are speaking out, trying to destigmatize mental health. It's wonderful work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if people want to find out more about the book, about your work, where do they go?
So I'm having a website built, which is jonathankemp.com. And on that, you'll find out about me, about the book, which is going to be released on the 10th of October, and also about the walk. So I will keep sort of regular updates on the website about the walk. And then also you'll be able to find different social media channels on there as well.
Wonderful. thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your story, opening up and letting us know about your struggles. It's really powerful. It's a powerful story. And so thank you so much.
Thank you very much for asking me and having me on your podcast.
And thank you, audience, those of you that have been listening and watching. Thanks so much for hanging in there here till the end. If you have liked this podcast, please do share with others, subscribe, rate it, do all the things that will help those algorithms get this information out there into the hands of those who are seeking, those who might be struggling or have a loved one who's struggling. Help us destigmatize mental health and get people the support that they need. So thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Kaleidoscope of Possibilities.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Kaleidoscope of Possibilities, Alternative Perspectives on Mental Health. This has been Dr. Adriana Popescu. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe and share with others. To find out more about me, my guests, and more, please visit my website at adrianapopescu.org. See you next time.